The world realized too late. The evil, corrupted unit was responsible for the creation of nearly all earbud brands across the earth, both premium and budget. While trapped in the dark void, he influenced corporate powers to implement his designs and eventually used the dissatisfaction energy to manifest into the world. Now that he's free, he plans on creating the One brand. Ironically, there is only one brand that can stop him.
Finally, world domination is within my grasp. From now on, if anyone wants to listen to their music or podcasts, we'll have to use my brand of earbuds. Poor sound quality, uncomfortable designs, and astronomical pricing. No one on this planet can stop my wrath. Huh? Who the hell are you?
You talking to me?
What is that in your ear?
What was that?
I said, what is that in your ear?
Hope.
No!
Conquer the forces of darkness with Raycon's new everyday earbuds, now featuring multi-point connectivity that allows you to pair with 2 devices at once, with 3 customizable sound profiles to better match whatever it is you're listening to. Their new active ergonomic design with optimized gel tips make for a comfortable fit that won't irritate your ear canal. Whether it be trying to fix my condition known as noodle arms, or brainstorming ideas for the next Raycon promotion by reading manga, Raycon's everyday earbuds are with me every step of the way. So support this channel by clicking the link in the description, or go to buyraycon.com/522 to get 20 to 40% off your Raycon purchase, plus free shipping. I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-olds on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site, set up our tents, and me and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the children as they swim, build forts, and play games. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, make s'mores, and the typical Canadian camping experience. It was around 9:30ish when I told the kids it was time for bed, and they head into their tents, which are positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed. Mike and I are shooting the shit by the water and smoking cigarettes, just basically hanging out before we decided to head into our tents and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black water when we saw a small light approaching us, slightly above water level. For a few minutes, we speculated about what it could possibly be, before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted to the front of a kayak and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it's important to remember that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with strangers in an environment where we were responsible for a group of children. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we were camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask if they go find another campsite. However, as the light drew closer, this person's appearance chilled me to the bone. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that was trailing in the water, Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth.
"Are all of your children safe in bed?"
she asked, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond and quite frankly shitting myself, I said, "They're fine. It's time for you to leave now."
"Oh, that's good. Just as I expected for this time of night."
She smiled, then turned her kayak around and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, Mike and I were legitimately creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mysterious woman who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry about the whereabouts and well-being of our campers. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where shit began to get very, very disturbing. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another group of kids around the same age. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing around with us. This isn't funny. My kids are very scared right now." I instantly called her and told her that Mike and I had seen someone near our campsite, and that the person seemed very creepy, and that we were not trying to pull a prank on her. That's when she told me that one of her kids had opened up their tent door to take a leak, and had seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open near the shoreline. From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and centers in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains, having grown up going to sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components. I was well prepared to lead a group of teenage girls from Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip in the Temagami region during my first year as a counselor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury, and Timmins, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bear Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical, beginning at the Whitefish Falls region and ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking, and campfire making. We had a satellite phone to check in with our camp director every day in case of an emergency. We also had multiple exit points along the route. Until our second to last day, we were having fun and a relatively uneventful time, aside from some mild dehydration and the usual bumps and bruises. Near the end of our trip, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognized as part of the reserve. It's a beautiful area, and we were across from the main island, where the majority of the 250 inhabitants live. When about an hour after falling asleep, I was jarred awake by the sound of a loud boat motor. Obviously, this wasn't that strange, because it's a very large lake, and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on secluded islands. However, this was around 11 p.m., and things had been quiet the past few hours. The motor cut out, and I could clearly hear the sounds of an argument happening. It sounded like at least one man and one woman. They were very angry and yelling at each other, although I couldn't hear anything specific because they were too far offshore. Suddenly, the woman screamed, and I heard a splash. Followed by complete silence. At this point, I was beyond freaked out and hoping to God that my girls hadn't woken up. But I wasn't that lucky, because I could immediately hear them talking from their tent, and could tell they were scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boaters had an accident or something, when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me, and then onto the tent my girls were in. They immediately stopped talking. In a normal volume, I was able to tell them to stay absolutely still. The light then panned back to my tent, and then over to theirs again. I can only guess it must have been some sort of boat with a mounted searchlight. After what seemed like an eternity, the light was turned off, and I heard the motor start up, and then fade into the distance as the boat drove away. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local police. I called them, and they said they would forward the information to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept for the rest of that night. I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and have a look around. I thought maybe that someone had fallen overboard. Obviously, I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it is a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp for one more night, so I called up the camp staff and had them head out to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard, or what might have happened to us if we had made a noise or moved when that light was on our tents. I've thought about this a lot over the years. Whenever I have told people this story, they've always been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing person cases in the area, but without much luck. If anyone reading this is familiar with Indigenous issues in Canada, there is an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and these cases usually go unreported or unsolved. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northwest Georgia. It's a very scenic area with hundreds of miles of national forest. There's some great state parks and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are not really well off. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work on a computer. If I didn't have that going for me, I would have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long. Aside from a doctor's office, a law firm, and the Georgia Power Company, the only employment in the area is a Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there is a massive national forest. It's loaded with camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy walking on them with my dog, but it can be an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were smashed car windows. Sometimes there are very shifty people hanging around these trailheads or driving around on the service roads. And I'll be honest, some of the people that you see there look like the guy that got crushed by the ATM machine in Breaking Bad. With all that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, me and two other friends decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip as well, so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, We drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in this area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decided to keep on looking, so we drive for about another hour, going further and further into the woods. By this time it was getting a bit dark, and we were getting a little worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turned off onto an unfamiliar road that wasn't in very good shape. It looked like the forest rangers had tried to use a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked as though 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. The F-150 we were driving had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side that was pretty much clear of debris. We drove for a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table that was nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to be driving around all night. We left the truck headlights on as we set up our tent. I began to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I saw a green bottle lying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of Home and Garden insecticide. I was very tired at the time, and I just thought someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area more than an hour away from the nearest house. We set up camp, have some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we were eating, I noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make any sense. It seemed to be a bright light, and it was moving. It's kind of like that glow you see over a bright city, but we couldn't see the light's source. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided that it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know that we wouldn't have done so. However, we had had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs. My other friend Isaac decides that he's going to stay behind and pop some popcorn over the fire, so we start walking toward the light. The situation begins to get even stranger. All the trees in the area had their bark removed in a circle around the trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in a nearby creek, but it seemed strange to us that a beaver would go around all these trees and just remove the bark in a circle. Jacob and I started joking about how it was the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices. The amount of alcohol we had consumed probably had something to do with that. As we were approaching the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit!" A few seconds after he shouted, the light immediately went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we didn't need to see what that light was after all. We then walked back in silence and kept looking behind us every few seconds. We decided to turn off the flashlight and just use the moonlight to navigate our way back to camp. Once we get about 100 feet away from our campsite, I can see our other friend Isaac walking around. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun in his hand. That seemed a bit odd. The fire had started to die down at this time, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we had been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it appeared that Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering into the tent. When we were almost back, we saw Isaac take off down the road we had come in from. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to go into the forest. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. Suddenly, we see him lunge out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet, then vomits. We asked him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun. He then gets a confused look on his face. "What are you talking about? They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it or something?" We go and check, entering the door code, and we saw all of our equipment just as we left it. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Isaac, what were you doing after we left?" I was watching a movie on my phone, and I guess I must have dozed off. But we saw you walking around with your paintball gun. Did you just change your jacket or something?" Isaac told us he had been in the tent since we left, and he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us were way too intoxicated to drive, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and head back to my house for the night. We didn't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it, and jump in the F-150, and I start to drive out. When we get back to that dirt mound, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the dirt mound. By this point, all of us had sobered up. Nobody wants to get out of the car and try to move that barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my truck, so I slowly drive forward, tapping the barrier with my metal guard. It falls right over. It must have just been balanced on the top of the mound. I then proceed to drive over it very slowly. We were terrified it would pop one of my truck's tires, but thankfully it didn't. As we drove down the road, we could see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It was probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we kept catching glimpses of it as the moon reflected off its windows. I began to pick up speed on the service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays 1 or 2 turns behind us, and we can only see it when the road straightened out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along these back roads, we make it back to the main road, and I begin to make my way back to the house, but I decided to take a different way just to be safe. Luckily, I never got pulled over for a DUI. Camping can be fun, but in very isolated rural areas, it's potentially dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier a few times since that night, but it's always been back in place. Either way, I would never go down that road again.
There's always a reason.